The following discussion includes stories of sexual assault and trauma which may be triggering to some viewers. Welcome to Circus Talk's discussion on abuse and assault in circus, normalizing the conversation. This panel is a part of Circus Talk's Circus and Changing Realities 2020, a series of virtual dialogues about the future of circus. I encourage you all to visit CircusTalk.com to watch these dialogues and to join in on the conversation. I'm your moderator, Veronica Blair. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a medium brown-skinned Black woman with tight coily hair, mascara-painted eyelashes, and red full lips. I'm wearing asymmetrical earrings and a black dress. I'm joining you today from Denver, Colorado, on the native lands of the Cheyenne and the Arapaho peoples. We acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. Now I'd like to invite our panel of esteemed individuals to introduce themselves, starting with Shanae Stiletto.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Shanae Stiletto. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a toffee-colored skinned Black woman with a high black-haired ballerina bun, glossy lips, and I'm wearing an ebony and ivory striped sleeveless dress. I'm joining you today from Los Angeles, California, on the native lands of the Chumash, Gabrielino, and Tatabayan peoples. We acknowledge them as past, present, and future caretakers of this land.
Malik?
Hi there, my name is Malik Cleveland. I am a dancer slash aerialist. I'm joining you all from Los Angeles, California. I am a light-skinned black male. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Yes, I'm happy to join you guys today.
Okay. Fiona.
Hi, I'm Fiona. My pronouns are they, them. I am a white non-binary person with glasses, a septum piercing, long brown hair. I'm wearing a light pink button-up. I live in Chicago on the native homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations, and many other tribes such as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, Fox, Kickapoo, and Illinois nations. We acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land.
Adrian.
Hi, my name is Adrian Porter. I'm the Director of Higher Education at the National Centre for Circus Arts in London, UK. My pronouns are him, he, and his. I am of Afro-Caribbean descent, which is formerly the land of the Arawak Indians, but currently live in the UK. And thank you for inviting me.
Virginie?
Hi, my name is Virginie Maloney. I am a lawyer and the coordinator of La Parte, who is a platform of help for and support for people in the entertainment industry that are victims of violence at work. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm French Canadian, so English is my second language. So it's probable that I will have to look for my words at some times. So, that's it. So thank you to help me, to invite me, sorry.
And Ren.
Hello, I am Ren. I use she, her pronouns. I am I don't know, average size, medium sized person. I am white. I have very long curly hair that's red. I have red rimmed glasses and shiny kind of green headphones on today. I'm a clinical social work associate and the pathways manager at the Circus Project. I'm also adjunct faculty and a doctoral candidate at Portland State University. And I'm joining you today from a very, very smoky Portland, Oregon in the US. And we are on the native lands of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much. I just want to dive right into it. How do we define abuse? A quick Google search of the word will get you these definitions. A verb, number one, to use something to bad effect or for a bad purpose, misuse. Number two, to treat a person or animal with cruelty or violence, especially regularly or repeatedly. A noun, the improper use of something. How do we define abuse? What is abuse? I'm gonna send this question off to Ren. Let's start us off, please.
Hi there. Yeah, I think this is such an important question. As we were talking about kind of before we started here, there is this stereotypical idea of what abuse is and what an abuser looks like, and even how a survivor might experience or what they might look like. Broadly, I think it's really important to think about abuse is about power and control. It is about power and control. And some of us might be familiar with like the power and control wheel. So sometimes, you know, there is a one-off kind of assault that can happen that's by a stranger, but more often than not, it's really someone we know. And we can be referring to ongoing harassment, intimidation, grooming, stalking, and various types of abuse by someone that we know in our communities. And so those can be trusted leaders, colleagues, teachers, coaches, duo partners. They can all be perpetrators of abuse. Additionally, this could occur in like intimate partnerships. So we might have heard of intimate partner violence or IPV. I want to share a little bit about like what is abuse in that context. So abuse that occurs in ongoing relationships often is kind of characterized by a cycle of like a building tension, excuse me, smoke in the air, some type of incident, reconciliation, and then calm. Often in that there's like a lot of blame on the person experiencing the abuse, that whatever behavior is happening is that person's fault, and the survivor, the person being targeted by the abuse, has to do everything they can to avoid whatever is going to happen. That being said, things don't always feel like a very clear, like organized structure like that. And so I'm not saying that within that experience, it's going to feel like a cycle that we can recognize. So, and I want to really point out that with that, the importance of acknowledging emotional abuse, and that can be really hard to see and understand and detect, and can certainly be very hard to explain to people and have them actually believe you in that. Oftentimes people are made to feel like they're crazy or doubting themselves in some way. And one last thing, I just want to share that, you know, it's important to, again, think about a range of behaviors, and it might not always be what we think it looks like. So in relationships, coercion can happen around sex, a partner thinking that, you know, they're owed that just because they're in a partnership, and that can be just as traumatic as a rape.
Thank you so much, Ren. Virginie, is there a legal definition when reporting of abuse when reporting?
It's really different, and it's depend of the type of abuse, because abuse is a large word. So we can talk about abuse of physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, financial abuse, isolation. So there's a lot of way to see it on the legal way. So if I can specific, like if it's in physical abuse, of course we will talk about pushing, shoving, slapping, kicking, all that physical violence. But if we talking about sexual abuse, we will talk about sexual assault, of course. We will talk about forced unwanted sex. So abuse, it's really depending of to make a legal definition of it. It's depend of what happened and of the description of the situation. So I can speak about what is more common. Of course, we're going to talk about sexual abuse. So sexual assault or rape, it's when you have unwanted sex with someone who doesn't consent to the sex. So, and of course, the sex can be different kind of activity. So, and all the legal part of the sexual assault are really in regard of the consent of the person. So, and this consent must be completely free, and it must be given without any pressure on it. So, and the pressure can be of a lot of different kind, or a lot of different matter. And so it's really depending of the case and what happened. But and we have other other kind of violence, and I like to speak about psychological harassment or sexual harassment. This is really more common, unfortunately, and it's always what I like to say on the gray zone. So it's not always as obvious that other kind of violence. So psychological harassment in Quebec, we're talking about a vexatious behavior in the form of repeated conduct, verbal comments, actions of or gesture, and those kind of behavior will affect the employer's dignity or the psychological or physical integrity of the person, and they are hostile or unwanted, and it makes the environment feel harmful or unsafe for the person. And the sexual harassment can be also present and in the form of psychological harassment, but it will be more, I like to say, two different kind of sexual harassment. One is really in regard of the gender of the person, like we really attack the person for her gender, or what she or he, or what it is. And another part, the sexual harassment can also be with always different incitation to have sexual favor, to like to be always on the person, to ask for sexual for activity, so it's really dependent of the case. And what makes it really difficult sometimes to really put a name and a word on it, it's sometimes people, they think it's just misconduct, it's a sexual misconduct, but at the end we're looking at it and it's like, no, it's more sexual harassment, because it's on a repetitive way and it's happened really often. And it's always, and not always, I'm sorry, but it's sometimes in a gray zone. So just, people who look really who look not really to have misconduct, but at the end it's become misconduct. So that is what we can say as a legal way, but it's really dependent of the different kind of abuse.
Okay, thank you. Virginie, can you describe the difference between sexual misconduct and sexual harassment? What is the difference?
At the end, it's really depending of the if it's for repetitive, if there is really a repetitive pattern, and because just one misconduct, it's not always enough to be sexual harassment on a legal matter, okay? Because sometimes it's difficult to really prove and to have enough evidence to show that there is sexual harassment. So one bad comments usually can be only sexual misconduct, but when is really repetitive and the person always going through and it's on a long term, it becomes sexual harassment. So it's really with the time usually, but you can still have only one conduct, a big conduct that will be sexual harassment, and we're talking about as sexual assault or to have really physical violence at work, something like that. Usually just one will be enough to be sexual harassment or to be psychological harassment. So
well, thank you very much. Thank you. So when we talk about repeated harassment, which is something that, and we are talking about normalizing the conversation of sexual harassment, sexual assault in circus, one of the things that is heavily prevalent in the circus industry is consistent harassment, and in some cases grooming, which is to slowly to pick someone and slowly try kind of prepare them for a sexual act. Excuse my definition. A testimony from Victims' Voices Circus reads, I was 16 when I met him and the grooming started. My dad started circus classes when I did. He knew the coach for months before I met him, and my sister occasionally took his classes too. It started out as him mentoring me and taking me under his wing. He really made me feel that my worth was in him, that he knew what was best for me and my future. He took advantage of my bad home life situation and the prior abuse I experienced. It quickly turned into inappropriate touching in front of people even. And he clearly waited until I was 17, the age of consent where we were, until he made his sexual advance. Literally 1 or 2 days after my birthday, he made me think it was real and consensual. Let's talk a bit about the dynamics between coaches and students, youth and adult relationships, producer, director, and artist relationships, because sometimes this energy between two people, a superior and a student, or a superior and an artist, this energy is not spoken of, but it is felt. It is felt, and also sometimes it can be even cultural. That you respect your coach, you respect your elders, you don't question. So let's dive into this. Let's try to demystify the dynamics of the coach and student relationship. I'd like to throw this one to you, Adrian.
Thank you, Veronica. Excuse me if it looks like I'm looking down. I've just got some notes here. So first off, I'd just like to say that, when I was looking at the youth and adult relationships, coach and student dynamics, the producer, director, artistic dynamics, they all came down to the same thing, and that was power. It's about who has more knowledge, who has less knowledge, who has more influence, who has less influence, and that perception. Because I do believe it's just a perception. And it's something that our culture and cultures all over the world have propagated and maintained. And if I take the relationship of, say, myself and my parents when I was growing up 50 years ago, and the relationship that I have now with my 6-year-old son, I was kind of thinking about the difference. And when I was growing up, it was very much a culture of children should be seen and not heard. It should be that children should be protected from the negative aspects of life. It's obey your mother and father without question. There's a no to an adult. not just to your parents. So if Uncle Bob comes in for Christmas dinner, actually eats your position and your authority. The idea that with age comes wisdom, the idea that youth are learners and adults are teachers, the idea that that actually kids grow into their power, when in fact I think pretty much all of those aren't true. I don't believe that they're true. I think children are far more powerful than adults in terms of their capacity for creativity, their capacity for thinking, their capacity for positivity. And when I look at the way I'm attempting to raise my son, I'm attempting to look at him without those cultural norms. When I think about the coach and the student dynamic, we're taught to respect our teachers, and that immediately makes us feel inferior as students. The student wants to please and wants to get their good grade, wants to be seen positively by their teacher and also by their peers. The teacher wants to be respected for their knowledge. The teacher basis, and I would say not all teachers, I would say I've come across many teachers who base their notion of success on the success of the student, not on the teacher's ability to inspire the student to go in the direction that they go in. And I think our education system feeds that. And it's a bit of an issue for me. I'm a great believer in a guy called Ken Robinson, who literally believes that the education system here in the UK and also in the US is destroying children's creativity by putting them in boxes. And for me, this is causing trauma all the way along. And it's opening up our kids for abuse very, very easily. And it's almost like we're blind walking into this space. It's really quite strange. With regards to producer, director, and artistic dynamic, for the most part, the students and graduates that I work with are driven by the need to work, not just from a financial perspective, but from an emotional perspective, from a creative perspective, and from a perspective of self-worth. They need to work. And this is easily railroaded by a director or a choreographer. The process is normally time-bound. So there's a pressure that is inside a creative process that is driven by the director and by the producer, because actually it's about money, it's about etc., etc. So the artist actually is not in a position to be able to, or doesn't feel as though they're in a position to be able to complete or to be able to highlight anything that might railroad that process. There's a competition inside the artist community, inside that production, because unwittingly for their place, and it kind of sets, I've seen it happen in several productions where people actually are set against each other, and it's not even a direct result of the director. It's the nature of that group, and it's a really odd beast. And for me, the best directors, or the directors that get the most amount of kudos or respect from me, are the ones that actually recognize and see that happening and are able to modify it and actually change that energy into something quite positive. Directors are perceived as having power over people's trajectories in their careers. In our school, I've heard people say to some of our graduates, you better behave well inside this production because it's a really small world. And if you don't, if you don't behave properly here, then actually you won't get any work. So there's constantly these areas of vulnerability that are played on either intentionally or they just exist, and people aren't really kind of recognizing that these are areas of vulnerability and need to be treated safely. With regards to the cultural differences, I don't know, I would say that from a cultural perspective, there are different degrees, but I haven't met one culture yet that doesn't experience what we're talking about right now. And if there is one, I would happily want to know about it. But there are different degrees of it. Everybody looks at Russia or China or the Eastern Europeans and they go, oh, that's terrible, that's bad. But actually, it's blowing up in America, in the gymnastics world. It's blowing up in the UK, in the gymnastics world. And, I've seen it myself, and it's really odd because it's like it's happening over there, but it's not happening with us. There's a denial surrounding this whole notion of abuse. And I think when Ren was talking about, when you guys were talking about physical abuse, I was writing some words down, and actually the nature of sarcasm is seen as witty, but actually it can be used for abuse really easily. The notion of anger and gaslighting, withholding feedback from a student or from an artist in a production, or giving them too much, and the rest of the group seeing this really odd dynamic happening, which in turn affects the group itself. So for me, this is such a complex issue, and I'm happy that we're having this conversation, and I really hope that we're able to kind of, as you were saying earlier, Veronica, to normalize the conversation so people can admit where they've been abusive, but where their own lack of understanding has either kind of contributed to or allowed something to happen. Because if it's not happening to me, then why would I complain about it? And actually we should.
Thank you so much, Adrian.
Sorry, I'm off my soapbox now.
No problem at all. Thank you so much. I'd like to throw this over to Malik, Fiona, and Shanae, and ask you to describe what the relationship dynamic was like between you and your abuser. Was your abuser a coach, a classmate, colleague, superior? And we can start this off with Malik.
Hi there. The person who I dealt with, they were my superior at a place of work. So it just made it, and it was a cultural thing. I kind of understood that. The culture was communicated to me prior to my kind of arrival on the scene, I'll say. So I was kind of prepared, so I was able to kind of steer my dealings with them and kind of set my boundaries up, but still, it still kind of, obviously, still kind of happened. So yeah, it was quite, looking back on it, I don't know how my 22-year-old self got through that, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. Fiona?
Yeah, so there have actually been multiple situations of abuse throughout my circus school career and also outside of that. But I was sexually assaulted by a student at my circus school twice. I also think it's important to recognize the other situations in my circus career and school, because every case was really different, and even if they weren't considered sexual assault, they were still very difficult for me in like defining and how I viewed circus and how comfortable I felt in my school and in my career. I've been harassed while performing by audience members, after performing by audience members. I have been told by my directors to wear less clothing while performing multiple times, and pressure me to be extremely sexual within my acts, which I didn't feel comfortable with, but I was continuously pressured to do so. I've had coaches say things to me. I was recovering from an eating disorder, and one of my coaches kept bringing up that I was gaining weight, which was obviously very triggering for me, and I would also consider that abuse and harassment. I've also had coaches harass me and groom me. So obviously there's a lot of different situations that have impacted how I feel about circus and how comfortable I am, and it's been kind of like a toxic environment for me and for a lot of other people that I know of.
Thank you, Fiona. Shanae?
Yes. Well, unfortunately, I came from the USA Gymnastics world, and then that was my pipeline into circus. And I was raped and molested by my USA Gymnastics coach as a little girl. He was a decades-long pedophile, and he was a known pedophile within the USA Gymnastics system. USA Gymnastics did not report him when they found out that he was raping and molesting little girls. And so he was able to exist in our environment for decades before he was brought to justice. I ended up going undercover with the police to secure a confession. And I wanted to say about my experience with my coach is that he was incredibly seductive. He was the favorite coach of everybody. He was everybody's friend. And so it wasn't this person hiding in the bushes type scenario. I had known him since I was 8 years old. My family knew him. He and his wife became my caretakers. I lived with them during the week. And then I flew home on the weekends for high-level elite training so that I could make it to the World Championships, so that I could, become get to the highest achievements of physicality within my sport of acrobatic gymnastics. And so it was an incredibly difficult environment. There were so many of us victims. And to remind people that this was happening out in the open. People knew that he was an abuser, and there was no accountability. Parents decided to continue to send their children to my former coach, David Rickbaum. They made so many excuses for his behavior. And like I said, he made me feel very special. It was very romanticized, the way that he did it. And before I knew it, he was showing up at my bedside before I went to, acrobatic training that morning. He was very well liked within the community. He had a very good standing for a very long time. And it was very difficult for those that enabled him to see him through the eyes of, to see him as the predator of children that he really, really was. It took for him, his ex-wife, discovering that he was using his 11-year-old son's Facebook account to prey on little girls within the gymnastics community. And that's how the authorities were alerted. But had it not been for that, and had the police not come to my door, I probably never would have said anything. I lived with that for about 10 years and almost told no one that I had been raped and molested repeatedly every single day. On my way to the gym, he would drive me to the gymnastics gym. and molest me. He would molest me during training. He would find ways to molest me while he was spotting me in tricks, in front of my other coach, which was his wife, in front of parents. He would molest me in the office of the gym. When there were camps that were away, he would use those opportunities to prey on other teammates of mine. There were several victims, and there was a lot of silence in and around the abuse within the USA Gymnastics system, in and around the gym. Nobody wanted to report him to the police. Even when the parents found out that he was raping and molesting their children, they did not want to report David Rickbaum to the police. So when people want to speak about why don't people say anything, and I watched this, I watched as he was exposed and not reported. And so that sent me into deeper silence, because I looked around as a child and thought, if you're not doing anything as parents knowing about this person, as this monstrous person, why would I say anything? What are you going to do? What are you going to do about me when I come forward? Because obviously they started, it's always about the children are lying. And, and what did you do this? My coach, David Rickbaum, he told people that it was because of our little outfits. How could he possibly have controlled himself? And by little outfits, I mean our gymnastics leotards and shorts. So he said, how could I have controlled myself in that environment? They were throwing themselves on me. Little girls were throwing themselves onto him, this adult man. And so fast forward into my circus career, I ended up being raped and assaulted, verbally abused, physically abused, emotionally abused, psychologically abused by my former French circus duo partner. We did a hand-to-hand. And it was incredibly abusive. It was very similar to the abuse that I experienced with my former USA Gymnastics coach, David Rickbaum. My circus duo partner felt like he was entitled to my body at all times. He stalked me just in the way that my former coach did as well. And he pretty much stopped at nothing. I almost didn't survive that experience with my circus duo partner. And I was abused in contracts in front of other performers, in front of directors, in front of, right after my performances. He would chase me down the corridors of the circus tent and try and strike me physically. I tried to go around telling people that this was happening to me and to try to get assistance. And everybody in circus just told me that I had such an amazing act that I should just focus on the act because it was so special, and that it was everything that anybody should work for in circus. Other women came to me and told me that they were also assaulted by my circus partner, and so he was relentless in his pursuit of me. I didn't know him very well, but in circus, we get very comfortable very quickly. And this was the setup also too that worked for him in his favor later on, because again, when it came down to, well, why were you in these situations with him that were so compromised? How did he get so much access to you? Why did you go back? I tried to escape many times, but I had so many contracts that I had signed in advance with this person. So for me, I felt like I was going to get blacklisted. He would threaten me constantly. And I would say that those propping him up within the circus community is what helped him exist in that way so much. It was so intimidating for me. I didn't feel like I had any agency. I didn't feel like I had any allies within the circus community. And I wasn't silent about my abuse in the way that I was when I was a little child. I couldn't necessarily get myself out of it because I was in too deep by the time it got on that level. So the abuses just continued to get more and more and more violent with my circus performance partner, and he continues to exist in this business now. He was just on the last season of America's Got Talent. He's always seen as this very romantic guy who's this kind of artistic genius. People love to speak about him, and they love to speak about him in this very kind of, celebritified circus kind of way. That assist him, again, just like with my coaches, just like we see in USA Gymnastics. If somebody can be, turned into some type of pseudo celebrity, it really works on their behalf. And we do that within circus. We create gods in this circus environment that are so dangerous. And I don't really know how I escaped from that I almost didn't get out. It took me the better part of a year to get away from him. And even within that, he told me that I was nothing. He tried to sue me when I left the partnership. He told me I was nothing without him, that everything that had happened to us success-wise was because of him, that I would never have a career again. And I can only imagine the salaciousness of what he spread around me since then, because he was very active in making sure that people thought that I was crazy in and around that environment when we were working together.
Thank you very much for sharing, Malik, Fiona, and Shanae. Thank you very much. It's really interesting that you talk about, I heard each and every one of you say something similar. Malik, you mentioned that it was the culture of your workplace. Like, you knew beforehand, someone told you about the culture of where you worked. And you were 22 years old and you just kind of jived and weaved through it, which I thought was interesting. And Fiona, you said that you experienced multiple accounts of abuse, and Shanae, the same as well. It's really interesting here. What I'm finding in the word that keeps coming up in my mind is the culture and the environment that supports the culture, that supports this abuse. Fiona, you mentioned in your article, Circus saved my life until it ruined it, that you wanted to report the abuse that was happening to you, but realized that you didn't, so that you didn't end up reporting because of the environment. Can you shed a little bit more light on that situation?
Yeah, I didn't end up reporting it for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons kind of connected to the culture was obviously that I had been not necessarily groomed by the person who actually sexually assaulted me at school, but I feel as if the entire circus community was kind of grooming me, just because I got so used to these types of situations that it didn't feel foreign to me. It felt like just kind of a thing that happened. Also, another reason that I didn't report was because one of my really close friends who went to that school as well with me, another student, had a very similar situation happen. And I'm not going to obviously go into any details about that, but the school did not help her in any way. The justice system did not help her in any way. And there was a lot of backlash, and she was ostracized. And I felt very uncomfortable witnessing that, like, directly before my sexual assault happened. It kind of taught me not to report and not to ask the school for help and not to ask anyone for help, because everyone had failed her. And I didn't want the same thing to happen to me. I didn't want people to talk about me. I didn't want people to call my abuser a good guy, an amazing circus artist, because that's exactly what happened to her. And I just knew it wouldn't benefit me at all to report. So I didn't.
An atmosphere that supports abuse, what does that look like? It looks like he didn't mean anything by it. Oh yeah, that's just the way he is. Just let it go. Just avoid him. But the act is so good though. You don't want to cause any trouble, do you? Those are words that victims hear all the time, not only in circus, but in the world. This is how people pacify abuse. It has become a part of our culture. Along with, I feel like I need to share some just normalized thought patterns around abuse. From the World Health Organization's report, series of briefings on violence prevention, the evidence, violent behavior is strongly influenced by cultural and social norms. So efforts to prevent violence must consider how social pressures and expectations influence individual behavior. Some cultural and social norms supporting different types of sexual and intimate partner violence. For sexual violence, girls are responsible for controlling a man's sexual urges. Sexual activity, including rape, is a marker of masculinity. Sex and sexuality are taboo subjects. We don't talk about that. On intimate partner violence is a taboo subject. We don't talk about it. And reporting abuse is disrespectful, embarrassing. So now we are at this place where the stigma of sexual assault perpetuates a shame-based silencing culture that can exacerbate the impact of the trauma. And I know, Ren, you've done a lot of research and work around this. Would you like to shed some light into that stigma that Fiona spoke about, that Shanae spoke about?
Yeah, so you're talking about the silence, the culture of silence.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I mean, what I think about in all of this is that any community that we're in is a microcosm of the broader culture and the norms. And again, like, everyone is sharing in their stories, and what we're talking about is how do we maintain power? How do we maintain the status quo? How do we not rock the boat? And the tool for that is silence and shame. So I think that abuse thrives on silence and invalidation. And people can, you know, even if people do come forward to someone in leadership and say something, someone's discomfort and silence and response can be very, you know, discouraging and validating, and create a kind of culture where we don't want to say anything, which perpetuates the trauma even more, because we need to reclaim ourself, our body, our narratives. And if we're in a space of shame and silence constantly, how do we do that? And that keeps the stress and trauma in our body deeply embedded in our nervous systems. And when we're in our community, we want to stay in our communities. We want to stay connected to the things that are important to us. And if there's this constant threat of, I'm going to lose, you know, social capital, access to friends, community, family, resources, employment opportunities, whatever it is, that's going to keep us in isolation and silence as well. And what about when we do say something and people in the community continue to support that person, like Shanae is talking about, and essentially ignore what we're saying and completely invalidate that? That trauma, that makes the trauma worse. That makes the experience worse. That silence is just incredibly harmful. Healing requires social support. And so we need to be able to create cultures in organizations, in institutions, that don't breed that shame around and silencing. Yeah, so I'm glad we're having this conversation. It's so important to destigmatize this.
Yes. Thank you, Ren. And so we approach this, a great point is the trauma and oppression and how trauma shows up in the body. I worked with a partner that was very abusive for 2 years. And I can say that my nervous system was shot. My stress level was through the roof. And so I was continuing to perform 11, 12, 14 shows a week with this partner. And I feel like this story is not really unique to circus. It's not unique to theater. It's not unique to any dance production. We have these relationships with each other, or in these families or these communities where there's no clear boundaries, and people test those boundaries, and you find yourselves in these abusive relationships. Or in the case of Malik, your superior was harassing you, and you have to continue to function within that environment, which is completely which is not normal, but we have somehow normalized it. Fiona, you mentioned that you continue to go to school every day with your abuser. Shanae, you saw your coach every day, every morning. And then you went on to circus, and you were in a duo partnership with your abuser. Can Malik, Fiona, or Shanae, would you like to share anything about how that trauma, how your body reacted to that trauma? If you have any experiences that you want to share. Okay.
I guess I don't think I was waiting to see if anybody else did.
No problem.
I would say that my how I reacted was hyper anxiety, a level of emotional distress that I almost cannot convey, especially from my circus duo partnership. In having that repeated trauma, I have, complex PTSD. It has manifested in all sorts of ways that I have been dealing with for quite some time now, with therapists and doing different types of trauma therapies. But when I was a little girl, how that manifested afterwards was having absolutely no boundaries in and around anything, and not having any sense of how to protect myself in any kind of space. I was just available for it because I had never been in a situation where I was able to say no to anything. So there was an invitation there for abuse that I had no idea that I had co-signed on, and that nobody around me at all either had understood that I had co-signed on this, because they hadn't known about the abuses that had happened. And then later on, surviving that and going through that trauma in and around my circus duo partner, I almost left circus because the abuse, and because the anxiety, and because the stress, and even the thought of maybe entering into a contract and he might be hired to be there, because we're all still working in the same circles, in the same communities. So it manifested in ways where I almost couldn't make it back to the stage. I almost couldn't make it into the rest of my life. I was going to leave circus. I was no longer going to perform. I felt like I was going to continuously experience all of these different manifestations of that trauma. I felt so much enormous shame and humiliation that I had maybe survived one aspect of trauma in my youth, but then now succumbed to it as an adult, and in a way, in space that I was meant to protect and support myself, and finding that I didn't have the agency to be able to do that, and that I was going to be existing in a very anarchical environment that was boundaryless and very incestuous, and thinking, how am I going to survive in this space where no one cares about me? I'm not safe. I have no support. I have nowhere to go to report if this in fact does happen, because that wasn't my only experience of being harassed and abused within the circus world. I had it in many other capacities, with directors, with producers, with other colleagues. And so going into these environments and feeling that emotional stress, that psychological burden on top of everything else that you're put through in terms of trying to perform your best, go all over the world, being in spaces alone, dealing with the level of isolation because you know of things that have happened to you that you can't share with others. You don't know how they're going to be used against you in this environment that is so competitive. Or when people I see commiserate in some levels of in your own misery. because we have normalized the conversation in and around this. And then I didn't want to be seen as weak and as victimized in this environment. Because we also, unfortunately, in circus, it becomes this marker of how much can you take, and if you can take it, then you can survive it, and you stay on top. Just like in USA Gymnastics, if you're able to do that, and you ended up winning and getting the medal and going to the Olympics, you somehow have achieved more and deserve a more righteous place within this environment. So I would say that the emotional distress was so acute and was so overwhelming that it has taken years, and I'm still working through that and trying to process it and release it and be like a normal, thriving human being and adult.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to answer the question as well. So for me, one of my first instances was my superior in question made a comment about what I was wearing. And as a dancer, Veronica probably knows this, but I sweat a lot. I'm usually the first one to sweat, and I'm usually sweating the most. Buckets and buckets every turn. And so I tend to wear shorts in rehearsals so that I'm not disgusting all the time. And when that comment was made, it made me start to question doing things that came natural to me. It made me start to question, oh, should I not wear shorts today? Am I being inviting if I wear these? And when it's like, no, I shouldn't, because essentially rehearsal clothes, that's our work uniform. That's unique to our practice and our profession, and so we should never be made to feel like what is essentially a material extension of who we are is now something that is not worthy or not appropriate when somebody else is actually a person that's doing that inappropriate behavior. And so it made me feel wrong for essentially trying to continue being hydrated and ventilated because somebody else is taking advantage of me, if that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
I guess I just want to echo what Shanae and Malik both said, because I felt very similarly. I also have PTSD now and flashbacks and physical reactions to certain situations, as well as that fear. And also the sexualization of my body really contributed to my eating disorder, and feeling as if my body was something to be gazed upon, something to be sexualized, especially in performing, and just kind of the pressure to be a sexual object for my audience, for my directors, and the pressure of having a certain physique, a certain form of the body, and all of the other performers who generally get hired for things have a certain look, as well as the abuse, all just kind of compounded into my eating disorder. So that's, for me, was a very physical reaction, because obviously that has to do with food and your body and how you take care of yourself.
Wow, thank you guys very much. So we're at this point where the abuse has happened, the harassment has happened, and you are performing at your highest physical peak. And you're performing, you're showing up to circus school, you're showing up to dance class, you're showing up for the show. And this traumatic thing has happened to you on top of you performing. Malik, Fiona, Shanae, can you kind of describe your work training environment after you were harassed and after you reported it? So let's say like the event happened, you went to admin, you reported, the word has gotten out, everyone's gossiping because that's what what happens in circus. Can you kind of paint a picture of the emotions or how you felt working or training in that environment?
It was very strained, like almost aggressively strained, because in my situation, our rehearsals then had to be observed and chaperoned at all times. The person was then like not allowed to be alone with us, effectively, like, moving forward. And so whenever we would have rehearsal with that person, it was just very the energy was very aggressive. It was very, strained towards us, from that person, as if like you guys did something wrong. Like, why did you guys make this like such a big deal? And it's like, no, like you can't. Like you're the one who made those inappropriate comments and gestures towards us in the workplace. Like you can't, you don't get to be upset about this. So it was kind of like almost like gaslighting, like, making us feel, crazy or inferior for having a genuine and natural and expected human response to something that shouldn't have happened in the first place.
Thank you. Adrian, go for it.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, Malik, and it literally sounds like an attempt, a power grab. Because actually the truth is going to be way more painful for him in terms of admitting his wrongdoings and his inappropriateness, etc., etc. What I've seen is people go into attack mode right at that point where they've been found out, and everybody else goes silent around them. So I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. In my case, first with my USA Gymnastics coach, after he was tried and convicted, I was just totally ostracized from the USA Gymnastics community and the environment. Nobody wanted to see me or hear from me at all. They called us liars. They still think that we're liars to this day. My coach ended up getting a really awful plea deal. And so he didn't serve as much time as he should have. And so even upon that, people thought that we were lying even more about what he did, because then they thought if he'd really done all these terrible things, for sure he would have gotten that big sentence. He'd still be in prison. He would have gotten the 20 years. So I even told people, you can even get justice and people still think that you're a liar when they talk about how we're saying things about people who haven't been convicted in the court of law, and you're describing these things that they did and saying that you're kind of trying this person in the court of public opinion. I say, even when we win, we lose. People, it took years for people to read the details of our abuses to say, I am so sorry. I actually read what he did to you young girls. I cannot believe that we have minimized this. But I was, ignored by USA Gymnastics. I tried to speak out on this for a very long time before everything happened with Larry Nassar and all of those victims were, exposed. And nobody wanted to speak to me about it. Nobody wanted to speak to me about the abuse. They thought that it was inflated, and they thought that we were all just trying to be popular and to be special in speaking about this problem, even though we were telling them that it was deeply systematic. I was constantly reaching out and denied and ignored. In terms of my circus duo partner, I didn't file complaints in real time. I filed those after we were working together. But in terms of speaking to people about him, which I have after I've stopped working with him all of these years, when I bring it up to people, I tell them about him. And there's a lot of people that know about him. They know that he's abusive. But then there's also the other people that I've spoken with when I have contracts that really try to minimize who he is, or say, well, I had an interaction with him, and I mean, he was like, okay kind of guy or whatever. And I say, well, I wouldn't have expected him to be maybe abusive to you. This like kind of like normal size, like, you know, guy, I wouldn't expect you to maybe have experienced the same situations or circumstances. But every single time I speak of it within the circus community, telling people that I have reported him and that I've done everything that I can legally against him, it's met with a lot of like consternation, and with people not really wanting to go there with me, and people wanting to kind of like downplay maybe what happened with him. And they're usually very suspicious of me. And what I find the most critical to my healing and my development, even with my coach, is how people are consistently suspicious of victims, and having people suspicious about what you're saying and the experience that you had with that person, instead of wanting to look and hold that person accountable or listen to the fullness of your story and reflection, and maybe do some investigating and some insightful reflection on their own, and say, let's look at this and take this kind of like seriously. Like, let's listen to you. Let's not just kind of like pass it off as maybe some gossip that she's talking about, because it's me trying to help and assist others within the circus community by sharing that when I'm in contracts. But in some ways, it's kind of in my way like met with like as gossip, I would say. So it's very difficult.
Thank you.
Yeah. So essentially, I was in my situation. I was also very gaslit by my abuser and by the community. Directly after the assault, he was saying things to me like, I didn't rape you, right? That was consensual, right? Like that's a normal thing to happen, and kind of trying to like normalize the situation. A friend or a friend at the time basically told me it wasn't rape, that it was it must have been consensual. Things in my work or in my school environment, like I said before, or Shanae said before, or no, when Veronica said before, that I had to go to school with him every day. I did not report, but people in the community, like I told people in the community and people who I thought were my friends, and it was just kind of silenced. So besides that, because I was pretty silent about it, people who were going to hire me and things like that didn't know about it. So I wasn't ostracized in like the wider circus community besides at school. But part of the reason for me like speaking out right now and talking about it, like with my article, with this panel and other things, is kind of because at the time I didn't report it. And I think, yeah, it's just something that needs, like, at the time I was repressing those memories. I was just trying to get rid of it. But now that I've kind of taken the time to process it, like with therapy and things like that, I think it's just important for me to talk about it with the community and make sure people know.
Thank you. I'd like to throw this question to Virginie and Ren. When should a victim of sexual abuse seek legal help? Who to report to? How to? Where? As you listen to the stories of Malik, Shanae, and Fiona, it's kind of the environment kind of supports the abuse, and it can be confused, and it can be treated as gossip. So how to report in situations like this, to who? Obviously it's not the best idea to report to your friend or colleague. But to who, how, where?
That's a good question, and it's I'm really first thing I want to thank you everyone for your story. It's really I'm sad to hear it, of course. And in Quebec, we have made in place La Parté, which is exactly a platform to help people in this kind of situation. So it's to help people to have legal advice from an independent and a confidential platform to really receive legal advice. So my suggestion is it's to say that the earlier you go to seek legal advice, the best it is. Of course, when you don't know that what is happening to you, because as you said, it's not like one day, okay, that's bad. It's really more like grooming, and there's some time involved, and also the normalization of the situation makes it really difficult to go to seek legal advice and to seek legal help. This is why it's so important to have resources that are completely independent and confidential. Because really, it's often that people came at La Parté and they said, I'm not sure if the situation, if it's legal or not. I'm not sure if I was victim of a sexual abuse. I want to just to see if it is or no. And most of the time it is like it's so. And what other another thing really important is we can see that there is when there is violence and in a workplace, it's just became always more violent and violent and violent, so it's always going up. So some people, they said, I don't want to make a complaint because I don't want to put it, I don't want that it became worse than what is it right now. So I just want to shut down and to be sure that um, that I don't have any more bad thing happen to me or bad behavior. I just want to shut down. And I'm like, the experience that I have with a lot of survivors and with a lot of victims, it's when you let it go, it's became worse. So it's the reverse. Like, it's all the violence is always going up. So it's so important to put strict limits and to put a stop at earlier time that we can. But of course, in real life, it's not always easy. I heard you, and I know how much it's difficult, especially in that kind of workplace when people, they try to normalize. And as you say, Shana, sorry, Shana, you said like people, they know and they just let it go, the bad behavior. So this is really disturbing because we need to put a stop the most earlier that we can. This is why it's so important. So to really be completely honest and to answer the question is, the earlier that you can have legal advice, the best it is. Even if you're not completely sure, even if you don't know if it's really legal or not, because of course you're not a lawyer, so it's difficult to really be there. And I support some of my friends that are lawyers and they didn't even know what was happening to them. Okay, so it's really important to go to seek legal advice. It's why at La Parté we're there, because, but of course we're in Quebec and we're on the law in Quebec. So this is one thing. And after that, the law is made that you must make a complaint to your superior or to the employer where you are working, because at the end, the responsible of the safe and security at workplace, it's the employer. So usually they must, and it's in their obligation, when they have a doubt that there is some violence at work or harassment or sexual abuse, they must be involved and they must make a stop to it. I know there's employer that does not make their jobs, okay? But in the law, what we know is that you must speak to your superior and to the employer or to the school if it's a school. So, and I know it's why it's really important to have some kind of moral support or to have some legal support for that, because it's not easy. And in my experience, just to be able to speak about it, it's hard. So I think it's the earlier that you can. And the other part is when you are in a circle of violence, you became more and more affected by it. So it's still difficult to be able psychologically to go to make a complaint, as an example. So when we're there and you can have legal advice earlier in an early stage, it can help usually. So this is my opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when I hear that question about like when should people report to who, where, all of that, like the immediate response that I think, you know, and we probably all hear this, there's hotlines, there's advocacy groups, and the advocacy groups ideally would do the work with a person to navigate all these systems. However, we're also talking about a culture that perpetuates silence, and that we walk into these systems and have, you know, or we go to report and there's a kind of response that is just even more traumatic. You know, when I think about, so then I want to reframe our lens in a way to think about what do we need to do to support survivors to report and communicate. We need to have cultures and institutions that are trauma informed. We need to be thinking about that. And so this doesn't mean a one-off sexual harassment training that you do at right when you get hired on somewhere. You know, this is about culture shift and a system of accountability and change. So I think that's really important to think about. When I think about my own response, if someone's coming to me, I want to really acknowledge that I can imagine this was really hard for you to share. And you know, I want to understand what's going on for you, and I want to be a support. And I'm gonna believe that person when they tell me. And I'm not gonna come up with excuses for anyone else. So we have a lot of work to do to be able to have responses that create a space where people do feel comfortable reporting and navigating those systems.
Thank you so much. What a great segue into our last question here is just straight and simple. How can organizations, schools, co-workers, colleagues better support victims of sexual abuse? Let's start on the organizational level. Go for it, Adrian.
Yeah, you know, there are so many aspects of this that just make me feel so despondent, in fact, because it's such a deeply entrenched issue. And for me, I want coming back to our relationship with our children, and I'll get onto institutions in a minute, because I live in an area where there are lots of mothers and children, and they're well-to-do. You know, they're not struggling or anything like that. And the way I see them treat their children, the way I see them physically handle their children in public is quite bizarre, because we're teaching our son to say, "This is my body, don't touch it." Like, and if you're touching me, it's because I'm letting you do that. And it really does kind of, this is a very poignant discussion for me. And I think in the case of institutions, with regards to Malik and your story, I find it quite bizarre that the action that the organisation would take would be to send somebody in to observe and observe him reinforcing his power dynamic in the group, I find that absolutely bizarre. And I think in our organization, I would hope that if one of our students came to us and said that, and we went in and had to observe the class and we observed that kind of behavior, they wouldn't be teaching with that group anymore. They wouldn't be teaching with our school anymore, because he's just switched it from one form of harassment to a slightly different one. And this has to be stamped out. And I absolutely agree with you, Ren, in terms of it starts with the leadership, and the leadership has to have this cultural shift. And then, one of my notes was re-educate teachers, and I meant kind of the entire organization, but not via online training modules. For me, it doesn't work like that. We can't just tick boxes and say, yes, we've done the training, but we have to be observed to be behaving in an appropriate way. And we have to build a culture, and that comes from the leadership, that has a zero tolerance for systemic behaviors that are negative, that have this negative impact, or institutional behaviors that have this negative impact.
So are you suggesting?
I think one of the things that
I'm sorry to interject, but
yeah.
So usually in circus and circus institutions, you have this like high level, high performing artists that had this amazing career that has all these accolades, and they automatically get the coaching job because of who they were as a performer. So are you suggesting that instead of that approach, which happens a lot in circus and in gymnastics, that potential coaches go through training? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I would suggest that the assumption is when an artist comes with high accolades and high achievements, the only assumption that we can make is that they're human. Okay, and from there we actually have to unpick what kind of human they are. Because for me, you can be excellent as an acrobat, or you can be excellent at a teacher somewhere else, but it doesn't mean that you're going to work with this group of people. It doesn't mean that you understand how to get the best out of people without belittling them, without pushing them down, because this is a tried and tested and successful in a kind of odd, like dark way of coaching. And I do not subscribe to this at all. So we've just had our first intake of first years, and one of the conversations that I had with them is the fact that we as an institution will treat you as individuals. We will not try and mold you into a specific area, a specific direction. You will be the people, you will choose your direction. We will support you in the direction that you want to go in. But don't look to us to tell you what to do, because that's not why you're here. And I think it's a really important message, because it destabilizes that dynamic between the teacher and the student and that whole power frame. And we're saying this to our first years. It's super, super important in my world. Anyway, at the National Centre, that we strive to create individuals that are in control of what they want to do and the direction that they want to go in. And it's not our place to impose that, because that imposition is totally open for abuse.
Oh, thank you.
I think that they should just be fired. Like, I just fire them. Even if there's not, like, I just get really upset because it's very, very, very difficult to go through the justice system and to actually get accountability, especially when there's no, like, proof, like there's no pictures, there's no text messages, whatever. It's really difficult because schools and companies will normally say, like, oh, we can't fire them until we have proof. But that is so invalidating. It comes from the assumption that I'm lying, and I just think they should be fired. People get fired for smaller things than that. Like, people get fired for many reasons, and you can just fire that person. So yeah, I'm just very passionate and upset about that. I mean, I also have other things that I think would be helpful. I don't think coaches in circus schools should be allowed to go to student parties ever. Like, that is not okay. That's happened to me multiple times, and it's very, very, very bad. It's a breach of boundaries. It's not good. I also think that every school and even company, if the company has money to do so, but especially schools, they should have therapists on site. They should have therapists for the students, because sometimes sometimes students don't feel comfortable enough to come forward to the institution or to whoever their boss is or whoever hired them. So if there is availability for therapists who have nothing to do with the admin of the school, have nothing to do with the situation outside of their duty to take care of the mental health of these students or these performers, then that therapist can work with the person to decide if they want to report, where they can report, and also if they decide not to report, it's like work on a sort of restorative justice or community justice type situation. Yeah, I just think therapy is really important. And just fire the person. Just fire them.
Yes, zero tolerance, right? Oh, Adrian?
Just to say, I profoundly agree with, sorry, just to say, Fiona, your point of teachers and students in social settings is profoundly wrong, I would say. And we've gone as far to say in our school that with regards to social media, you are not allowed to be following any of your students at all. And that is in their contract. And by default, it means going out to pubs and going out to clubs, etc., etc.
Excellent. Malik?
I feel like there needs to be a lot more, as a whole, I'm seeing that there is a lack of specialized communication and training for people in leadership positions. So, like, for instance, as a student and as a professional, I've had many, a lot of documents and contracts saying, oh, there's a no fraternization policy, there's zero tolerance, this, all that stuff. And that's all great for there to be a clear understanding amongst the student body, but based on results, at least in my experience, in many different settings, that has not proved to be the case with those in superior leadership, higher up positions. And not only does it's not even just that the same conversation that's being had with students and people in more performer roles, it's not even just that the conversation needs to be equal for the other ones, it needs to be heightened because, like you said, the fish rots from the head down. And for there to be a strong understanding amongst the student or performer, population, there needs to be an even stronger understanding amongst those who are creating the foundation and framework for whatever that organization is. And that's just not happening. Because it feels like organizations are so happy to have this great individual, this great artist, this great coach or whatever, that they'll do anything, to keep them. And it's just like Fiona said, just fire them. It really is that simple. It shouldn't, and I agree with you, Adrian, it shouldn't have been a question of, oh, we'll just make sure that you guys are never alone with that person. No, and make sure that person never walks into the room again. Because now, if I've had a negative or extremely uncomfortable, experience with that person, just seeing them as a trigger, me having to have extended periods of time with them, after the fact, is like egregious. It shouldn't happen. I shouldn't be put through that ever again. And nobody should. I'm not just speaking for myself. So having a chaperone doesn't make it better at all, or giving them a slap on the wrist doesn't make it better. Sexual misconduct or sexual harassment is a very extreme experience for anybody to go through, whether it was a full rape or not. And so the consequences have to be as extreme, if not more. So that's what I would say.
Yes.
Well, like Fiona's saying, to fire them. And for me, because I've been in the legal system now for 10 plus years because of things that happened to me by my coach, and I'm still in the legal system now fighting against USA Gymnastics in bankruptcy court. So this is kind of like never ending. I just finished recording my victim statement to the Montreal Police Department about my former circus duo partner just the other week. And then I was called to a week and a half ago to participate again in an ongoing internal investigation into USA Gymnastics that I started and completed 2 years ago. So for me, it's not just fire them, but everybody file your reports. Artists, file your reports. We need to stop going to the people that created this problem and looking to them to solve it. That's exactly what they were trying to do in USA Gymnastics. They lobby with millions of dollars to keep their rights, to keep people and survivors like us out of this system and out of accountability. So for me, people say this is too much of a high order. I think we need a Circus Artists Protection Act in America. They never thought that we would have something for youth sports before they decided and it got passed into law in America. Now we have a Youth Sports Act where it's a safety act for all NGBs, national governing bodies, national USA Gymnastics, USA Swimming, USA Tennis, where there is mandatory reporting and they cannot police themselves. The circus community is totally inept and impotent to be able to handle this situation, this crisis. It is a cancer that has metastasized throughout the entire governing body of circus. Okay, we don't take this seriously. We rationalize everything. I'm tired of going into contracts where people come and whisper in my ear, he's a little rapey, or I reported him before. Make sure that when you have cues with him to be careful. Or that manager has the most sexual harassment claims out of anyone here. He got demoted. He went cold for a little bit and now they have brought him back. And then you go to hug that manager and meet him and he hugs you for a little bit too long and his hands travel. I mean, this happens constantly, all the time in this business. When are we going to say that the circus environment is too sick to take care of itself? It is too sick. There needs to be so much more oversight happening within this environment and in these institutions. And there's not going to be enough internal investigations. We still don't have an independent investigation into USA Gymnastics and Larry Nassar. We don't know the who, the what, the when, the where. We do not. They continue to lobby and lawyer up to keep us out of knowing exactly what happened. And that's what we need in circus. We travel all over the world. It's very complicated to hold people accountable. I was traveling all over. It's been very difficult to file these reports. But the system needs to hear from us. And when people know that the threat of what they're doing is going to land them in front of the police or potentially land them in court and not just get them fired, people will start to act differently. People know that there are new rights to children. That if you do that, you're not just going to be passed around like the Catholic Church. That's what they used to do in USA Gymnastics. Instead of firing you or reporting you to the police, they would just let you go to another gym. So you could just pop up in another gym and no record of anything that you did, whether it was molestation or rape, would ever find you in another place. So you can hide. And so we can't do this within circus as well, where people are just allowed to go around and find a new community, find a new job, find a new country, and feel like they can just continue to flourish, because where's the legal accountability for any of them there? I know that it's going to be very difficult for there to be some kind of cohesive responsibility across like all countries and across all sectors. But for me, it comes down to legal accountability and getting these stories out there, because when I go and file my reports, so many things that I tell the police, it's very difficult for them to understand. Well, why were you there? Or how did that happen? Why were you in that country for so little time? Why didn't you file the report to your employer? You know, when I filed to HR for Cirque du Soleil about my circus duo partner, there was only so far that I could take that. They deflected it and nothing happened. I too told them this person should never be in a role of coach, advisor, of producer, of director. This is a violent person, a career pedophile abuser, because I know of other things that he did in his past before me. So for me, there was only so much that I could do, and so far that I could take it within the realm of reporting to your employer. But when employers know that they have a different level of accountability, that there is going to be some independent accountability, that they're going to be forced to be responsive to, these organizations and things are going to act very, very different. Just like we see the situation with ENC, where they want to have an internal investigation into abuse there. No, there needs to be an independent investigation. Only God knows how many stories and things have happened within these circus schools. I meet circus students all the time that are completely ill-equipped to handle this business. They come into this business like little children, and the worst things happen to them. I am in this business, we all are, all the time, and I meet them all the time. They have no idea what awaits them in a circus contract. They have no idea how they are going to be handled, how they're going to be abused, what things are going to be said to them, and they don't know any of their rights, traveling in America or traveling outside of the country. So for me, it's like, again, the education, the training needs to be explicit. I was on the athlete task force, a part of USC Gymnastics, creating and reinstituting policy there. And what people usually ask me, the first question is, what do we do to fight this abuse? And I say, you need to be explicit in your training. No matter how young that person is or that individual is, teaching them explicitly about sexual abuse and harassment. And that's what we need to do in this environment too. We need to stop over glamorizing harassment, talking about them like they're salacious affairs when they're assaults and they're rapes. We need to use the right words. We need to use the words that hurt, that don't feel comfortable. Nothing about this conversation needs to be comfortable moving forward. We have so far to go in terms of normalizing this conversation in circus, but people need to file their reports. No matter what happened to you, find the counsel. I used websites to help me to report internationally. It's been very difficult. It's been exhaustive. It doesn't matter. Tell our circus stories so that they understand how to put it into law, so they understand how to try our cases, so that they normalize our environment and see them as real assaults, real abuses, and not just characters on a circus stage.
Thank you, Shanae. Thank you.
I agree with a lot of the stuff you're saying, but I just want to add that for some people, it might be very triggering or difficult to report. And I totally think that it should be a thing that everyone can make a choice to easily report. And like you were describing, it took you years and years and years for this to, it's not even done yet. It's gonna go on for years. And I personally don't have the emotional energy or time to go through that. Also, I think it's very important for the burden of that not to necessarily be on the victim. I wish that the abuser could be the one to report, but obviously that's never going to happen. I wish that the circus school could take accountability, or the company could take accountability and go through that process. But I just can't, and some people just can't. So I just think it's important for the institutions to really work on prevention and also taking care of their people.
Thank you, Fiona. Ren or Virginie, any final remarks on how organizations can better support victims of sexual abuse?
Yes, I hear you. And when I heard Fiona was saying, just fired him, like the lawyer in me, it was like, it's not that easy, unfortunately. Like there's some rules and laws to respect, and at some point also, when you want to fire someone, depending on the situation, it is maybe like you must have to do an investigation. So sometimes even the correct way right now to do that will be really emotionally difficult for the survivor or for the victim. So depending on the situation, the law is not really easy for that. And another point that I think is really important is the law right now is really doing it's it's like you are working for an employer or you are studying at school, you must report to the employer. So the trouble with that is that if you change of employer in the same week, if you're working like to another place, like you must make a report at each employers, which is a little bit like it's doesn't really respond the needs right now of the victim or of the survivor. So it's why the possibility to have an independent investigator or some place to go, which be for everyone, whoever is the employer, whoever is where you're working, or which where you are, like which states you are, because this is another really important fact. So would be really, I think, a good solution. But right now, it's the thing is how to put it in place. It's not easy. It's really not easy. But I completely understand the whole and for myself, when I'm helping or when I'm giving legal advice, at some point I have to say, you must make a complaint to the employer. There is no magic right now. There is no magic solution right now. So it's really important to continue to have this reflection and to have this discussion, because I think there's a lot of solution that will be better to help right now. And also we're talking about this culture of silence, but it's a culture of rape also. So we need to, I think, to really address it. So
I guess I just really want to quickly add, I know I keep jumping in, but I'm sorry. People get fired all the time for discriminatory reasons, and the employers still find a way to fire them based off of complete other reasons. Like they'll say something else that isn't the actual reason to fire them and fire them. And I just think that they should be fired, even if they can find another way. I'm done, sorry.
I think kind of like what I was saying earlier, that there is a need for institutions, organizations, schools to beef up their understanding of trauma-informed teaching and how they engage with humans, because humans experience trauma in multiple forms. And so whether it's happening in the institution or not, we need to understand how that's showing up and how that impacts how our students or employees are showing up. And we need to be able to create spaces that are responsive to that. And, there's plenty of methods and ways for educating leadership and employees in that. So I think there needs to be multiple forms of responses too, including looking at specific policies and practices within the organization that can respond to these situations and help to shift the culture. And that being said, like, you know, at the same time, we're waiting in a way for maybe change in the legal system, you know, maybe we, you know, as when survivors are ready and able to report, and again, having choice in that from a trauma-informed perspective is a good thing. But kind of having all these things happen at once, right? So supporting people to report when they're ready and having multiple forms of change within an institution that is genuinely thinking about trauma and not just prioritizing coaches or leadership because they have some status.
Exactly. Yes, Adrian.
Right,
Bring us on home, Adrian.
I just wanted to say that. I think there's this. The world has changed like incredibly in terms of what we understand about like culture over the last, say, 20 years, and the word that's come up quite often today is around accountability. And so I'm on the board of FEDEC, and Veronica knows this because we chatted about this the other day. And when I was invited to this panel talk, I decided to go through the FedEx policies.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through their ethics policy and various other ones. And actually, I found a glaringly obvious and terrible mistake in their policies, because inside the ethics policy, they referred to the teacher and the student as he, which for me is really clearly not looking at the bigger picture. And so from that, strangely enough, I had a board meeting kind of like a few days later, and I presented this to the FEDEC, and I said, listen guys, I'm just about to go onto this panel meeting. I've just looked at our ethics policy, and it doesn't include anybody unless they're male. And they absolutely saw that as a huge issue. So actually, between the board members, we are reviewing all of our documents, but we are reviewing them and we're moderating them as well. So it's not a case of I will review the ethics charter and what I say goes into the ethics charter. Actually, it's being moderated amongst the board members. And actually, I would like to go as far as to get it moderated by my own organization and the National Centre for Circus Arts. But I think it's absolutely necessary, if we're going to continue this discussion inside our institutions, that we first have to pick up our policies and actually look at whether we can hold ourselves accountable with them. Because if we can't, then actually that's a huge issue that we have. And if it's going to start with leadership, it has to start with what the organization stands for and what it wants to promote and what it wants to say to the rest of the world. And if it doesn't say any of the things that we've been talking about today, then we've got a big issue.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I'd like to thank each of our panelists for attending and sharing their perspectives on this very sensitive topic. Thank you so much, everyone. Circus and Changing Realities 2020 is Circus Talk's response to the changing realities that the pandemic brought to our industry. Those of you who may not know, Circus Talk is an inclusive, independent, and international online network for the circus community. Circus Talk's mission is to create a level playing field for the industry and democratize access to information. If you are not a member yet, I encourage you to sign up at CircusTalk.com. If you have experienced or are experiencing sexual harassment, sexual abuse, bullying, please look in the description box below for resources. Again, thank you to all of our panelists, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.